Hello and welcome back to the Wargamer and another bolt action painting tutorial. In this video I'll be showing you how you can paint your German infantry in a winter scheme, and as always I'll be using the Army Painter range of paints to do so. Before we can begin painting our miniature, we first of all need to prime it, and for this I've used a grey primer. Now I've used grey because it's a lot easier to apply some lighter colours over the top, and there will be quite a few of those in this tutorial. Now I've applied this using an airbrush, but you could use an aerosol can instead. After priming, the first task in painting our German infantryman is to paint the camouflage coverings on his trousers. Now I'm using a sumph mustard or swamp pattern camouflage scheme here, but this is entirely optional. You can paint them using the regular field grey colours, and if you want to do it that way, then wait until I tackle the scarves and also the gloves and copy those same steps. However, if like me you want to have a camouflage pattern on your miniature, you'll first of all want to base coat this area using Banshee Brown. Now, as with all the base coats that I'll be applying in this tutorial, I would recommend creating a mixture of 1 part paint to 1 part water, applying this over the area and then letting it dry thoroughly before applying a second coat over the top. Now this will give us a really nice and even coverage without running the risk of obscuring the details by applying the paint too thickly. The first area of the camouflage that I'll be painting will be the green patches, and for this I'll be using Army Green to apply some horizontal patches to the trousers. Now when painting camouflage, it's highly recommended that you have a reference image so you can make sure that the shape of the camouflage patches and also their dispersion is correct. The final step in applying our camouflage pattern is to tackle the red-brown areas, and for this I'm going to be using Chaotic Red. Now, much like when we applied the green patches, I would highly recommend using that reference image to make sure you're applying these in the correct manner. Now, as a final optional detail, you can apply some vertical army green stripes to the trousers. Just make sure they're very thin when you do them. If you look at most sumph mustard camouflage patterns, you'll find some very thin vertical lines. And this is what we're trying to recreate. But don't worry if you don't have a brush thin enough for this. This step is entirely optional. With our camouflage pattern completed, we now want to apply some shading to the area, not only to darken down the colour that we already have, but also to get some shading inside those recesses. So for this, I'm going to be using some strong tone ink. Now with a wash, you want to apply it over the entirety of the area, and personally, I like to mix in a small amount of quick shade mixing medium, roughly equal parts. So this gives us a much smoother transition between the darker sections that the strong tone has pooled in and the areas where it hasn't quite covered quite so well. If you don't have access to this quick shade mixing medium, you can instead use water, but it doesn't work quite as well. With our camouflage pattern completed, the next step is to start painting the winter jacket. Now for this, I'm starting off with a base coat of Spaceship Exterior. Now on the camera, it may look like I'm painting white, but in fact, Spaceship Exterior is just an extremely light grey. Now the reason I'm not using white as a base coat here is because it's very difficult to highlight white, because white is as light as it possibly can be. And also by applying a slightly off-white, a light grey instead, it gives us a slightly worn and dirty appearance to the jacket. With our base coat of Spaceship Exterior dried, the next step is to apply a wash of dark tone ink over the jacket. Now this wash has two purposes, the first being to flow into all of those recesses and really help to bring out that detailing that we have in the folds and creases in the cloth. The second reason is to ever so slightly darken down the colour of the material and really enhance that dirty and worn look. Now, much like the strong tone ink wash we applied to the camouflage trousers, I would highly recommend creating a mixture of quick shade mixing medium and dark tone ink, as applying the dark tone ink straight out of the bottle may be a little bit too strong and overpowering on the light colourings. After allowing the wash to dry, the next step is to highlight the folds in the jacket using matte white. With our jacket completed, the next step is to paint both the gloves and also the scarf wrapped around the head. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't want to paint the trousers with their camouflage pattern, you can follow the same steps I'll be using here. So you want to start off using a base coat of field grey on these areas. With our base coats completed, we now want to apply a wash of dark tone ink over these field grey areas. And remember to mix in that small amount of quick shade mixing medium to really improve the flow of the wash. The final step in painting our field grey areas is to apply an edge highlight of Filthy Cape. The next area of our German infantryman that I'll be painting will be the red leather and also the wooden areas of the miniature. Now this includes the stock of the rifle and also the boots and the entrenching tool handle as well. We want to base coat all these areas using Fur Brown. With our base coats to the wooden and red leather areas of the miniature completed, we can see that they're a little bit too bright for what we want them for. So we're going to be darkening down the colour and also getting some detail in those crevices and recesses by applying a wash of strong tone ink over all of these areas. With our wash dried, we can now complete the wooden and red leather areas by applying an edge highlight of tanned flesh. For some added detail, you could apply some thin horizontal lines along the stock of the rifle to give it that wood grain effect as well. The next area of our German infantryman to paint is the felt covering on the water bottle and also the leather sling on the rifle as well. Now we want to base coat both of these areas using oak brown. With our base coat of oak brown completed, we are once again going to be using our strong tone ink to wash over these areas and really get those details showing up in the recesses. The final step in painting our brown felt and brown leather areas is to highlight them using leather brown. With your highlight of leather brown completed, we can now begin work on some of the canvas areas on the miniature. In this case, I'll be painting the canvas satchel on the back of our German infantryman, and I'll be using a base coat of Banshee Brown. With our base coat completed, we once again want to apply a wash of strong tone ink to these areas. Now don't forget to mix in that quick shade mixing medium, and with this being quite a light colour, I would highly recommend creating a mixture of 1 part quick shade mixing medium to 1 part strong tone ink to give you some really nice subtle shading. The final step in painting our canvas areas is to highlight the edges using Drake Tooth. Now the next few areas that we wish to paint are quite numerous. They include the helmet, any metal areas on the rifle, and also any black leather areas that there may be on the miniature. And we want to base coat all of these areas using Necromancer Cloak. With all the base coats of Necromancer Cloak completed, we now want to apply a wash of dark tone ink to these areas. The final step in painting our black leather and metallic areas is to apply a fine highlight of Spaceship Exterior to the edges of these areas. Now Spaceship Exterior is quite a light paint, as this is what we base coated the jacket with, so you want to be very careful and only use very fine lines. It's a lot easier to do this if you mix in just a small amount of water with your paint and also use a very fine brush, and also make sure you take your time as well. Now continuing with our Spaceship Exterior, we want to apply a whitewash to the helmet. Now instead of painting the whole helmet white, we want to give the effect that paint has been chipped and flaked off. So you want to take a small piece of foam, dip it in your Spaceship Exterior, remove most of the excess, and then start lightly dabbing it along the top of the helmet. After steadily building this up over several layers, you'll get the effect of a helmet which was originally white but has seen some damage, and therefore the paint has been removed, revealing the darker colouring underneath. Now the final area of our miniature that we want to paint will be any skin that is visible on the miniature. Now we want to base coat these areas, first of all, using Kobold Skin. With our base coat completed, we now want to apply a wash of flesh wash over the entirety of the skin. Now don't forget to create that mixture of around about 1 part quick shade mixing medium and 1 part flesh wash to get really nice subtle transitions. Once the flesh wash has dried, the next step is to apply a highlight of corpse pale to the raised sections of the face. This includes the brow of the nose, the cheekbones, and also the lips as well. If you wish to apply some beard growth to your German infantryman, this can be achieved quite easily. Take some Necromancer Cloak and mix in 1 part Necromancer Cloak to 2 parts water, and then apply this around the mouth. Once this is dried, apply a second layer at the top to give you a nice dark level of shading. Finally, you can create the effect of chapped skin around the nose and cheeks by using a wash of red tone ink targeted on these areas. Now while these last 2 steps are entirely optional, they do add an extra level of detail to your miniatures. And here we have the completed miniature, which I finished off by applying a snowy themed base to. Now all of the paints used in this tutorial have been included in the description below, along with some of the tools I've used as well. In there you can also find links to both my Facebook page and my Facebook groups, as well as my Instagram page as well. If you enjoyed this video, please do let me know in the comments, along with your suggestions for future bolt action tutorials you would like to see me tackle, and also make sure you subscribe to be kept up to date with all of my latest videos. And finally, I just want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, because it's you guys who make these videos possible. If you're interested in supporting me as well, you can do so by checking out my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the description below. And from there you can donate to me from as little as $1 a month, which just really helps me in producing these videos. And with that, the final thing to say is thanks for watching and goodbye.